Thank you to the Center for Educational Measurement, ably headed by Father Roderick Salazar Jr., for the privilege of being a part of this 42nd anniversary virtual conference. On behalf of the Department of Education, with Secretary Leonor Liling Magdalez Briones, I also congratulate the Center for Educational Measurement for the many things that you have done in making sure that the quality of Philippine education is fostered and sustained. For today, I was assigned to talk about supporting the transition to new learning delivery modalities. And we know that the transition is very important. We know that education is not only a fundamental human right. It is said that when education systems collapse, peaceful, prosperous, and productive societies cannot be sustained. So we feel, especially basic education, is an enabling right with direct impact on the realization of all other human rights. It's a global common good and a primary driver of progress across all 17 Sustainable Development Goals as a bedrock of just, equal, inclusive, peaceful societies. I know that when COVID-19 came, everyone was affected. And we, basic educators, were also challenged because in the Department of Education, we really would like to make sure that the youngsters are given the opportunity to continue to learn. So the Secretary has actually spearheaded the design of a basic education learning continuity plan that is supposed to get input from everybody and come up with multiple learning delivery options. Initially, when we thought it was possible to do the authentic blended learning approach where there would still be time for teachers and learners to see each other at least once a week, we came up with that framework as stipulated in our learning continuity plan under Deputy Order number 12, series of 2020. But when we were told that classes cannot proceed until a vaccine is available, we have reconfigured the learning delivery modalities. I think most of you are aware that we will do online learning, distance learning for learners with access to gadgets. We'll also offer modular distance learning two ways. One is for those with digital resources with access to technological gadgets. We'll do the digital modular distance learning. And for those without access to any gadget, we'll rely on the the old way of doing distance learning through printed self-learning modules. And we'll also harness TV and radio in making learning happen. And we say there's a blended distance learning if you combine any of these approaches. So again, the value of education cannot be ignored. The impact of COVID-19 to us, of course, is really big. It has induced a learning crisis, extreme reduction in the average levels of cognitive skills development, deficits in the development of motivational and socio-emotional skills, disruption of early childhood education. Among the many adverse impact of the COVID-19 to us basic educators are these things which will really have serious adverse effects, not only in the lives of our youngsters, but also in our society. This one, I'm not going to discuss everything, but this table indicates that if we allow learning loss, for example, for 1/4 of the school year or for 1/4, there would be a discounted future GDP impact of 1.1%, meaning the gross domestic product of the country will be affected by that much. And in the future, and actually in the current GDP, it's more than half of the GDP that would be affected if we allow learning loss for 1/4 of the school year. And in the future, 80 years from now, it will still have an impact because, again, the kind of learning and competencies and knowledge, skills, and orientations our children will be missing. And then the latter part of the table indicates that if we really accede to what people are saying, that we have to do an academic freeze, it would be more than 200% impact on the current gross domestic product of our country. These economic losses would grow if schools are unable to restart quickly. This is the reason why we feel that indeed, yes, we have to find ways of ensuring that learning can start. These are other factors that may also specifically impact on our failure to allow the youngsters to start learning. They would be suffering from slower development of cognitive skills. They will have deficits in the already mentioned earlier, and then the early childhood education will also be disrupted. This will decrease the learner's likelihood of continuing their education. I know the secretary always mentions this in her press briefings. She has spoken with kids, with children who are so excited to already start learning. And so we cannot really afford to further postpone the opening of the school year. And we're very appreciative of what the private sector has done because they're allowed, of course, they have certain autonomy in deciding on when to begin the school year within the period we have set. And a big number of private schools have started. And I know that most parents are somehow challenged, but are happy and glad to note that their children are indeed very excited to learn. The notion that lost years of schooling are not so bad if they affect everyone are based on the erroneous assumption of a national economic cake of fixed size, in that education largely serves to determine the share of income going to each individual. But the cake shrinks when everyone reaches a lower level of education. The entire economy suffers. This one is from Usec and Wisman in their recent article. So it's really important. I don't have to emphasize this, but we feel that there's a need to explain not only to ourselves but to a wider community why we should not allow the learners to be prohibited or to be not given access to basic education services in this school year 2020-2021. The initiatives and plans to address the challenge, the Department of Education, as I mentioned, has created a basic education learning continuity plan in time of COVID-19, which is our response to strengthen the resilience of Philippine education systems for equitable and sustainable development. Essentially, we will still, prior to COVID-19, we were trying to focus our efforts on the pivot to quality under the so-called Sulong Edukalidad initiative, which is not only on quality but equity and inclusion. We also believe that the efforts to make sure that the different learning delivery modalities are implemented well will rely on strong leadership, on coordination between and among communities and teachers, parents, learners, the public sector and the private sector, and all our stakeholders. And we are witnesses to the overwhelming support of the local government officials in making sure that the learning continuity plan will be implemented successfully in the public schools. We are also advocating for the accelerated positive change in teaching and learning. Of course, the new normal is going to bring us a lot of changes. How do we intend to support education? We will try to make sure that we will utilize the teachers more effectively within and across distance learning delivery modalities. We will make sure that we will move forward toward more individualized instruction matched to its student and families' preferences. Again, we will go for an education delivery mechanism that is flexible, equitable, and inclusive. For those who are not from DepEd, I'm also sharing that the Secretary believes that the central office should only be setting the broad directions. She believes that in delivering modular or the different distance learning delivery modalities, there is no one size fits all. The schools and the schools division offices and even the regions are fully aware of their own context, and as has been demonstrated by the thousands, more than 30,000 so far, dry runs of the versions each school would be implementing as far as the learning delivery modalities is concerned, has demonstrated the creativity and competence of our fellow teachers and fellow school officials. We will support the private schools and teachers in the transition to new learning delivery modalities. The old status quo will no longer serve our students well. If they are to be remediated, it would require innovations, not returning schools to where they were in 2019. I understand that because of the crisis, we had to do things fast, and the first DepEd order that directly affected the private sector was not very popular. But the Department of Education, Secretary Liling quickly instructed our team to meet with the private schools and discuss how we can make our policies more responsive to the challenges being faced by the private schools as well. I think all of us are aware that as of the last count, more than 800 have closed. So we will also be extending the so-called support to this transition in the form of guidance in the implementation of the chosen distance learning delivery modality. We have issued this and eventually modified because we really agreed that even for the private sector, there should be flexibility. So we have extended the deadline for the compliance, and we also make sure that the essential things are addressed, like the teacher professional development, the orientation plan for teachers, for parents, because we know that when we do home-based learning, the parents will also be performing new tasks and new functions. They also have to be given proper orientation. And then we made sure that, again, the private schools are allowed to make decisions on their fees as long as the parents are consulted. And the communication mechanisms have been established at the school level, so that because we feel that one very important factor that will determine success of whatever distance learning delivery modality we will offer will depend on how communication is going to happen between the school and the home, between the teacher and the parent, and between the teacher and the learner, and perhaps the learner with fellow learners in some other ways. So what's important is indeed even private schools are able to produce their own learning continuity plans. We also, the other support mechanism we're focusing on is the provision of teacher professional development courses to all public and private school teachers, like the learning delivery modalities. There's a course on that. We also have a course for promoting and protecting the well-being and welfare of the learners. And we also offer courses on the provision of mental health and psychosocial support for our fellow teachers and school leaders. So it's not just the learners that are being catered to, but we understand all of us, I think, have some moments of like doubt whether we're still doing the right things or not. So the support in terms of psychosocial and psycho-emotional support for everybody is very important. And of course, as is obvious in this slide, we will provide guidance for our fellow teachers and school heads in making decisions about how to manage and implement their own chosen learning delivery modalities. We will also be sharing resources and platforms. We have launched DepEd Commons. It's available not only for the Department of Education. We will authorize access. And in fact, upon request, we also would not refuse private schools wishing to make use of our own self-learning modules and other learning resources, because we feel, the Secretary believes, that these are resources that may be of use to all sectors, not only the Department of Education. And I'm also glad that the private sector is volunteering, giving their help, extending their hands to help us in quality assuring these resources and even in producing these resources. We also advocate strategic thinking and planning of school leaders. The Prince model of leadership is my original formulation, my synthesis of what I feel a leader should have as as a characteristics. I feel that no one can be an effective leader if he or she is not proactive. If we will just wait for things to happen, we cannot consider ourselves leaders. I know that most of you are aware that the leader's primary task or main function is to inspire or influence the team to create the results, the shared outcomes or results identified by such a team or aspired for by such a team. And pro-action is very important. We don't wait for others to tell us what to do. The leaders who are strategic in their thinking so that they can respond to the challenges in more effective ways should always not be afraid to do the first step, to take risks. The second element in my ideal leader framework, the Prince framework, is results orientation. I always say that if we don't know the kind of things that we wish to accomplish, we will not accomplish such things. We will not go anywhere if we are not very clear about the things that we wish to accomplish. And of course, in the case of our basic education initiatives for COVID-19, it's all about making sure that the youngsters end up learning the most essential learning competencies we have identified. I also feel that a leader has to be intelligent, but the intelligence here does not refer to our intelligence quotient, high IQ. I feel that this is more about the so-called emotional intelligence, or in our Gardner's perspective, being self-smart and being people smart. Among all the many intelligences identified, I feel that these two intelligences are very important for leaders. A leader who understands himself or herself, a leader who possesses self-mastery, will be able to address the challenges in more effective ways. A leader who knows himself or herself would not be overwhelmed by the challenges, would know where to get the right support, emotional or whatever support, so that his focus towards the achievement of goals will not be disturbed. The intelligent leader, aside from being self-smart or being a person with self-mastery, is also a person who knows how to nurture harmonious relationship with others. Let us remember that the leader has to work with people. If we don't understand the basics of individual differences of organizational behavior, the kind of human beings that surround us, we will always be disappointed, irritated, and we will refuse to understand others. But if we realize that not all human beings feel and think in the same way, we will be more tolerant, we will be more understanding of the contributions and perhaps shortcomings of the people in our team. The other characteristic I wish to describe my ideal leader is being a builder of networks. Again, we do not do things on our own as leaders. We rely on the efforts of others. And it's very critical that the more we have other people on board towards the strategies, the initiatives we're trying to implement, the better it would be for us. If you ask me, the fifth element of that framework, Prince framework, credibility, being credible is most important. You don't get the respect. You fail to influence when people do not believe you, when people know that what we say does not match the things that we do. Being credible is really maintaining integrity, word of honor, and fulfilling promises, and making sure that whatever it is we commit to do, we find ways of accomplishing them. And finally, the last element, they are not arranged in the order of importance, but just to make it easy for me to remember what my ideal leader is the word letter E, which stands for empowerment. I fully believe that the other important task, other than influencing people and inspiring people, our team, to help us accomplish the goals, the other important task that a leader should be able to do is to find his or her replacement when it is his or her time to live and move on to other challenges. When we empower people, we make them experience how it is to have certain autonomy, certain authority to make decisions. Because after all, I think, and based on my own experience, personal experience, being a 35-year-old veteran in the Department of Education, starting in 1985 as a high school industrial arts teacher, is the value of making people really believe that they are capable of performing their tasks. When we empower, we focus on capacitating our team. When we empower, we allow them to actually have leeways on how things should be done, as long as the results are very clear. Of course, it was mentioned that I push for transparency, ethics, and accountability in public governance as far as schools is concerned. And when we talk about transparency, ethics, and accountability, it really captures what I was saying about the need for us to be credible. When one is transparent, members of the team are not surprised about certain decisions. You are able to explain it well. You don't hide knowledge or information from the team. When you are ethical, and if you believe that the public service is really about giving yourself, offering it for others so that the public sector may be enhanced, then you will resist all sorts of temptations offered to you. When you are accountable, you admit if the decisions you make are not correct. Do not blame others. Take the responsibility and accountability for such decision. The leader's role shifts completely into symbolic keeper of hope. And when we care about our teachers, I always say this, as humans and as families, all of the details of their professional lives will get resolved. I think, although I'm not very familiar with the private school sector, but in the public schools, this is what I always say, that if we make our fellow teachers feel valued and respected, they will tend to give wholehearted and committed public service. If we impose and threaten them, they will abide, but they will not do it wholeheartedly. They will just comply, but you should not expect that they will give their best. To me, indeed, treating our team as dignified human beings is very important as well, even as we attempt to support this transition into the new learning delivery modalities. We also would still continue in the Department of Education to reinforce the complementary roles played between public and private educational institutions in our education system. So we will continue to implement the education service contracting, the teachers' salary subsidies, the senior high school voucher program. Insets are also offered, and even in the field of research. I understand our very dynamic director, Doris Ferrer of the PAYAC Secretariat, is very aggressive in capacitating our fellow teachers as well, and in the field of research. And what I understand is That's a part of the funds that the Department of Education shares or the government shares with the office to make sure that the private sector is also nurtured and cared for. We also advocate economic support for private schools and teachers. We have supported the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, which includes relief packages for 263,000 affected private school teachers, as well as overseas Filipino workers to help their children continue their education amid the pandemic. We are forging partnership with the Land Bank of the Philippines for low-interest loans to private schools to pay for their students' tuition so they can come up with their study now, pay later plans. The government has been trying very hard. Of course, it's going to be very challenging because all sectors want to have a bigger share of the pie. Is trying hard to make sure that the requirements of everybody is somehow addressed. The COVID-19 crisis is a strong reminder of the essential role that we in the government and other key partners have on an ongoing duty of care to educational personnel. Let us choose to be resilient and continue laying our groundwork for the rebound. We should be very hopeful that after doing something, after extending all our efforts, we will really deliver the expectations, the expected basic education and services that we should be providing the youngsters of the country. Of course, we always remember that the Office of the Undersecretary for Curriculum and Instruction, we are called CI in DepEd. We also always remember that in everything we do, children are most important. Let me add one more acronym. So PRINCE is being proactive, results-oriented, intelligent, network building, credible, and empowering. I also would want to invite all of you to join me in Arayo as we try very hard to support the transition with concrete technological and technical interventions to sustain and to make sure that learning will be sustained and will be effective. I also invite you to join me in a riot. Riot is not going to create chaos if we are respectful, intentional, optimistic, and trusting. When we respect people, some of these are already captured in the Prince model, but when we are respectful, we do not treat others as inferiors to ourselves. We value everybody, even the school janitor, the smallest member of our school community, as a human being created by God with dignity. When we are intentional, again, we are clear about the things that we want to do, and we make sure that the intention for doing it is not for our own selfish interest. When we are intentional, especially during this COVID-19 time, we will be desirous of enabling every youngster to become the productive Filipino citizen we want them to be. When we are optimistic, we will always look forward to the morning, even during midnight. When we are optimistic, we will always believe that every effort we exert will somehow have a corresponding positive effect on the work that we do or on the project that we're working on. And when we trust people, we believe that every human being is capable of doing good. We believe that the person, the human person, is inherently good. And we will try very hard not to doubt others until they prove otherwise. Thank you very much po. Mabuhay and God bless. Congratulations once again to the Center for Educational Measurement on your 42nd anniversary celebration.